Warning. Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I was trapped in a coma for 10 days when the crooked lady appeared and stared into my eyes. Late one night, long after my family had been sent home, the crooked lady staggered alongside my hospital bed, moving the way you'd expect someone with a broken spine and shattered legs to. I could hear her slow, labored inhales and taste the stench of her breath. She tapped my forehead with a cold finger, pulled my eyelids back, then placed what felt like leeches all over my face. Later, I discovered they weren't normal leeches, they were capped with 3 narrow slits for eyes and a mouth, like a human face at the end of a slimy black strip. As they latched onto me, I felt a strange chilling sensation, and terror like I'd never known before. All I could do is lie helplessly and pray for it to end. The crooked lady pulled the leeches off and swallowed them whole. Then she disappeared, leaving me gasping for lungfuls of air. At first, I thought it was a nightmare. But she came back the next night. And the next. Sometimes she spoke while she worked, shushing me when I gasped or saying things like, "Almost done," when my body spasmed. Her voice had a hard, raspy texture to it. This continued until one night, after collecting the leeches, she looked into my eyes again. She nodded, stepped back, then whispered one more session should do it. This time, the chilling sensation remained after she'd gone. When I woke up, bars of sunlight were cast through the blinds. It was a beautiful day outside, but I still felt cold. Numb. I pushed the emergency call button on the side of my bed. A minute passed. Then several. I mashed the button again and again. Nothing happened. I rolled out of bed and fell to the floor. It felt like my legs hadn't been used in years. Resting on a chair in the corner was a baseball bat, and a card from my daughter. It read, "Get well soon, Daddy, I left you my lucky bat to help you get better faster." My daughter had called it her lucky bat since she hit 2 game-winning home runs with it back-to-back. Since I was too busy with work, I'd missed both. All I could think about was seeing my family again. I stumbled to the hall and tried calling for help, but my mouth was so dry I could barely manage a whisper. I made my way to the nurse's station and collapsed in front of 2 doctors. They continued with their conversation like I wasn't even there. It sounded like they were speaking underwater. At first, I thought I was dreaming, or having a crazy hallucination, but as the dizziness passed I became more aware of my surroundings. The patients complaining, the sterile smell. It felt too real, it couldn't be a dream. But something was wrong. The ward and everything in it looked like it had been taken from an old, discolored photo enshrouded in mist. I shook doctors and pushed nurses with what little strength I had, they all ignored me. Solid objects barely moved when I tried picking them up or knocking them aside. It was like being trapped behind an invisible barrier, unable to manipulate the world. I'd become a ghost. As naive as it sounds, I believed my family would be able to see me, and that if I could just make it home, everything would be okay. It was like stumbling through fog. Every so often I'd collide with an echo of the world and use it to guide my way. When I finally arrived, I called my wife's name. She spun around and smiled. For a moment, I thought she'd seen me. But then my daughter walked past and hugged her mom. I slumped back against the wall, watching them sit down to eat, completely oblivious to my presence. For hours I tried making them notice me. I held my daughter in my arms and felt the warmth of her breath against my cheek. A flicker of recognition flashed across her face. "It's me," I cried, "I'm here. I love you." Her lip trembled. My wife asked what was wrong. I was thinking about Daddy. I broke down and sobbed. I couldn't resign myself to this. There had to be a way back. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew the crooked lady was responsible. If she stayed true to her word, she'd be paying me one last visit. Perhaps there was a way to undo whatever she'd done. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all I had. I took one last look around the house, memorizing every detail. I kissed my daughter on the forehead and said, "I love you." She shivered as a tear ran down her cheek. I made my way back to the hospital and waited. Hours passed. From the quiet of the hall I heard the unsteady steps. My throat tightened as they drew closer. I peeked behind the door just in time to see the crooked lady burst forward, knocking me clean across the room. "You weren't supposed to wake up," she groaned. I lay on my back winded. She reached out to grab me, but I caught her withered wrist with both hands. With the devil's strength, she thrust it towards my neck and touched her fingertips to my throat. Darkness crept to the edge of my vision. I pushed my feet against her chest and kicked with all my strength. She collided with a bedside monitor and fell to the ground. When she stood I got my first proper look at her and wretched. Her torso was misaligned from her legs, and her jaw from the rest of her head. She charged, arms outstretched and elbows facing the wrong way, revealing more bends and twists than any human should ever have. She grabbed my throat and pinned me against the wall, my toes barely scraped the floor. The leeches slithered down her arm and onto my face. One lingered on her hand for a moment and stared. The horrible sensation returned, more intense than ever before. An indescribable pain. I drove my thumbs into the crooked lady's eyes, but my hands started fading away. She smiled at my panicked reaction. In a last desperate effort, I tried to pry her hand off my throat. I touched something slimy. It was a leech. I pulled it off my neck and squeezed as hard as I could. It made a disgusting squelch. The crooked lady wheezed and groaned. It hurt her. I grabbed another one. She pulled me back and slammed me against wall. Hard. There was a moment of blinding pain as my vision blurred. Then a trickle of blood ran down my forehead. I kept hold of the leech and pinched it between my finger and thumb. Squelch. Her grip loosened. She shrieked in pain, and I was free. I snatched more leeches off my face and crushed them. The crooked lady staggered and whirled around, roaring curses. She flailed her arms, knocking both me and a ventilator clean across the room. The ventilator collided with the chair in the corner and knocked it over. My daughter's bat fell onto my lap. I could touch it. I wiped blood from my eyes and scrambled to my feet as the crooked lady twisted her head right around to face me. I swung the bat straight into her nose. She hissed and spat. She lurched forward but was too slow. I swung in a downward arc and smashed the crown of her head. I followed her around the room landing more blows. She made a sound like a cat coughing up a fur ball, then vomited a torrent of sticky black bile. It spewed from her mouth like a fountain. Trapped in it were more leeches. They tried crawling towards me but were stuck in the black substance, a few threads of which were still hanging out of the crooked lady's mouth. I stomped one. She groaned. I stomped again and again. She writhed and contorted worse than before. Steam rose from her body and she wailed like a banshee. Now I'd returned to normal, and she was the one fading away. There was only one leech left, but, nauseous from my injury, I fell onto my back and dropped the bat. A hospital light spun above my head. The crooked lady crawled on top of me and raised a hand to my throat one last time. I fumbled for the last leech and found it and squeezed. The last thing I remember was a nurse running into the room. When I woke up, my family were at my side. After a tearful reunion, a doctor walked in with a furrowed brow. He wanted to know how I'd managed to wake up from a coma, split my head open, and trash the room, all without being noticed. For a moment, I considered telling him the whole ordeal, but decided against it. So far as I could tell, they'd found no trace of the crooked lady.